A few minutes ago, it came out publicly that James Earl Jones passed away. You know, this passing, I mean, I have a lot to say about James Earl Jones, but what I wanted to say is he was in his 90s, and there were reports that he had recorded a lot of audio for Disney so they could use AI to replicate the voice of Darth Vader for future projects. And it was at that point that he had retired from voicing Vader, presumably because he was really up there in age and he probably wanted to just spend time with his family and away from work in his final years. And I do think that if you dedicate your whole life to something, I do think that you deserve to have the last few years of your life be at peace. That's how I feel about it. And unfortunately, it's not always like that. You know, my father, he worked all the way until the last 2 years of his life when he couldn't work anymore because he was diagnosed with COPD. But he never saved his money. He never invested. And even with me there, like, you know, the last couple years of his life, we lived together, and he didn't have that ability to just rest and not work. But putting that aside, you know, it's still a shocker, no matter how old he is. James Earl Jones was 93. I want to discuss my memories of James Earl Jones and what he has sort of meant to me as a fan of movies and television. You know, James Earl Jones has played and voiced some of the most iconic characters in history. Obviously, Mufasa from The Lion King. The new Mufasa film's coming out in just a few months. Hopefully they add like a James Earl Jones tribute, like, you know, into the film. I really hope they add that to the credits, because I mean, there would be no Lion King if not for James Earl Jones. That performance as Mufasa was so powerful, with that incredibly deep voice and strong voice. You know, he had a very unique voice, an incredible voice. I mean, I think everybody knew how cool he was. But Mufasa was like, for kids of the 80s and 90s, Lion King was a big deal. That was a massive Disney film. Huge. And Mufasa was just one of the great characters and really the patriarch of the story. Then, of course, we have Darth Vader. I mean, is there a more iconic villain in cinema history? I don't think there is. I think even though Emperor Palpatine was the higher up villain, Darth Vader was the one that people saw first in the first Star Wars film in 1977, when he walked into that hallway and started choking dudes. So the power of James Earl Jones's voice is just so strong. He also did, I believe, CBS. I think it was CBS. He would do the deep, "This is CBS," many, many years ago. Just instantly recognizable. But yet what's interesting is his voice as Vader and his voice as Mufasa, it's the same guy, but the performances are different. It's not like it was just, you know, a one-note guy. His performances were different. I think, you know, those two performances aside, he was also in films like Doctor Strangelove all the way back in the 60s. He was in The Great White Hope. He was in Malcolm X. He was in Swashbuckler. He has been in a ton of films. And when I say Malcolm X, I mean the 1972 Malcolm X. He has had a relatively great career, you know, not just doing voices, but actually being on the screen. I remember the first time I saw James Earl Jones on screen, not just doing a voice, because I think Darth Vader was probably the first time I ever heard his voice, was in Conan the Barbarian, where he was the lead villain. You know, I remember seeing him there. I remember he was in Coming to America as well. In fact, you know, that is, you know, he had a knack to do a lot of different kinds of movies. It wasn't just action drama. He did animation. He did comedy. Like, James Earl Jones was a very well-versed actor, like in lots of different types of movies. He was in Field of Dreams. I recently picked that up in 4K. He was also in those early 90s Tom Clancy movies like The Hunt for Red October and Patriot Games, Clear and Present Danger, Of course, he was in Exorcist 2, one of the weirdest movies ever made. That's a very strange film. Now, I remember when I was younger, and I do not remember the name of the film, but there was a movie that he did, and I believe it was based on either maybe not a true story, but it was inspired by actual events, by an actual eyewitness situation of an alien abduction. It was a film where he was in a forest with, I think, his wife, and there was a UFO. I do not remember the name of this film, but I know it's old, and I saw it on television back in the 90s and the 80s. Really, in the 80s, and even before then, there was a television show host down in the Tampa Bay area whose name was Dr. Paul Bear. If you have ever been to Tampa, or if you have friends who have been in Tampa during that era, or if you know a lot about horror, Dr. Paul Bear was a guy who basically would host this afternoon show on Saturdays at a local, it was a local UPN 44. I think it was called WTOG back then. And Dr. Paul Bear would show horror movies during the afternoon every Saturday. And I remember I used to love watching him because the first time I got to see a lot of these horror films, and yeah, they were cut down and censor for TV, but still they were movies that I had not seen before. The first time I had seen Nightmare on Elm Street 1 and 2, I believe, was on Dr. Paul Bear's show. The first time I had ever seen Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds was there. I remember seeing a movie about these, like, it might have been like an alligator, a giant gator. I don't remember. This is literally like very, very young. I was very, very, very young. Dr. Paul Bear, I think, passed away in the mid 90s. But he showed this movie once with James Earl Jones and this UFO abduction. And I've thought about that. Well, I haven't thought about that movie in a while, but I would like to see it again. I just don't remember the name of that film. He was also in the late 80s martial arts movie Best of the Best, a movie that I have not seen in God knows how long. I saw it on TV also back in the day, and a movie that was recently brought back into pop culture prominence thanks to Cobra Kai, because Johnny Lawrence talked about how much of a fan he was of Best of the Best, and there was a clip of it in Cobra Kai, even though I think the clip in Cobra Kai was from Best of the Best 2, it's still Best of the Best. It's still the same idea. So he was in that movie. You know, he wouldn't often be, like, he could do a leading man's role, but he wasn't always the leading man. He was a good supporting actor as well. And like I said, he had a lot of range. He was in a lot of strange movies and in a lot of roles that, you know, you wouldn't think that an actor had that much versatility, but he definitely was one of them. The last time that I saw him, like, not heard him, but actually saw him, was many years ago. I was with a girl, and she wanted me to watch an episode of Big Bang Theory. Now, I'm not a fan of Big Bang Theory. I don't really find the show that funny, but it is very popular. And I remember there was an episode of Big Bang Theory where they got to meet James Earl Jones. He played himself, and Sheldon got to meet him. And, you know, obviously him being Darth Vader was a big deal. And I remember that was very, very cool. Like, I remember, I've never been in love with that show, but that was a fun episode. You know, I had a good time with it. And that was the last time I can remember actually seeing him physically on screen. Also, I just looked it up to make sure I wasn't going crazy. Yes, the movie that I'm talking about was called The UFO Incident. That's the film that, it was a TV movie that came out in the 70s. I vividly remember him being in that movie. He played Barney Hill. It was about a couple who were abducted. I do remember that. And for a TV movie, it was a little creepy. So, I've seen a few. I haven't seen all his movies, but he's been in quite a few. So, absolute legend. He's a guy who meant a lot to a lot of people. And a man who won't be forgotten. And yeah, he was old, and he lived a full life, and we can be thankful for that. We can be thankful for that. It's a big bummer. What can you do? Rest in peace, James Earl Jones. You will not be forgotten.